Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Mem Amud Aleph, 6 lines from the top. The Gemara is discussing when a Gentile does a malacha for a Jew, whether it's on Shabbos or on Yontif, is prohibited to get hana from that malacha. However, on Motzei Shabbos or Motzei Yontif, if a person waits what's called Kadesh Yasu, the amount of time to do that malacha, then the Jew can get hana from such a malacha that was done for them on Shabbos or on Yontif. Says the Gemara, Hahu lifto da asi lemechuza. There was a turnip that was brought by a Gentile into the city of Mechuza. Nofak Rava chazia de kamisha. Rava went out and he determined that this turnip was withered. Shara Rava lemizbe minei. As a result, Rava permitted the Jews to buy such a turnip. In other words, even though it was Yontif, but through buying on credit with certain procedures, it was permitted to do so because it was not reaped on that very day. Omar ho vadai me'esmo ne'ekro. Rava reasoned that since it was withered, certainly it was only uprooted the day before, no malacha was done on that day, and therefore they can go ahead and buy that turnip. Mayamris michus letchum asya. What are you going to say? It should be also because the Gentile brought it from outside of the tchum. We know that if a Gentile brought something from outside the tchum for one Jew, it would be permissible for a different Jew. Certainly over here, when the Gentile brought the turnips, he's bringing these turnips for other Gentiles that are in the city of Mechuza. And there's certainly, therefore, a Jew can then use those turnips for himself. However, once Rava saw that these Gentiles were bringing a lot of turnips into the city of Mechuza, they realized it was not only for the Gentiles, but to sell it to the Jews. And therefore he prohibited them to use and buy those turnips for the Gentiles, because it was then prohibited for them as well. The Gemara now brings another incident. Hanhu b'nei Genona, the gazu luhu asa b'yontif sheni. Here we're talking about on Yontif Sheni, Shogaliois. Here on the second day of Yontif, it states that the Gentile was making a canopy, a kilo shel chasonim, which they would cut hadassim to put on the kilo shel chasonim, on the canopy for chasonim. And it was Yontif Sheni. La'arta shara lohu ravina la'aruche be la'alter. That Motzei Yomtiv, Ravina permitted the Jews to smell those hadassim immediately, meaning without even having to wait Kadesh Yasu. In other words, he was makil, since it was Yontiv Sheni, he reasoned that even though the malacha was done on Yontiv Sheni of Kitzira by the Gentile, they can go ahead and smell it immediately after Yontif Sheni without having to wait, because it was only Yontif Sheni. It was therefore something to be makil. Omar le Rava bar Tachlifa le Ravina. Rava bar Tachlifa asked Ravina the following question: Lesin luhu mar mipnei she'ena b'nei Torah. But you should prohibit it and not be makil, because for the people who are not b'nei Torah, they'll become the mezalzil in Yontif Sheni. If you allow people to smell the hadassim that was cut on Yontif itself, Yontif Sheni itself, even if you allow them only immediately after Motzei Yomtiv. Maski flo Rav Shmaya, time of the Einam b'nei Torah. Ha b'nei Torah shari. Are you going to say the only reason why it's prohibited is because people who are not b'nei Torah mezalz and Yontif Sheni, saying that you can go ahead and smell these hadassim immediately after Yontif Sheni without having to wait? But if it was indeed b'nei Torah, that would not be a problem. You're saying it's only a problem because the mezalzil in Yontif Sheni, for who people are not b'nei Torah? What about b'nei Torah? What about the halacha itself of Kadesh Yasu? That it should then, you have to wait an amount of time to be harvested Motzei Yomtiv, to then they'll have hana from that hadas. Also, the Shailu the Rava, they went and they asked Rava what they should do. In this permissible to allow people to smell hadas immediately after Yomtiv? Omar luhu be'inon be'kadesh yasu. Even after Yomtiv Sheni, you can't be making, and you have to wait Kadesh Yasu after Yomtiv to then be able to then have hana from these hadasim. The Gemara now quotes the seif of our Mishnah. Rabbi Doisa oimer ha'oiver lifnei ateva. Rabbi Doisa here states two requirements on Rosh Hashanah. Aleph, he says in the Tefillah one has to mention Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah. And Beis, he has to make a T'nai in his Tefillah. If today is the day of Rosh Hashanah, and not tomorrow, or if tomorrow is and not today. In other words, he doesn't want that the person who's davening should be a shakran, should appear like a liar, and therefore he should make a T'nai. Omar Rabba. Rabba said the following: Ki havina be Rav Huna iboilon. When I was in the Beis Hamedrish by Rav Huna, so we asked Rav Huna the following question: Mau lahazkir shorosh chodesh b'rosh Hashanah. What is the din? Does one have to mention Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah when he davens? Kiven de chalukim v'musafin amrinon. Maybe you have to mention it because the same way that there's Korban Musaf on Rosh Hashanah, but there's also separate Korban Musaf for Rosh Chodesh, and therefore it would require mentioning Rosh Chodesh separately. Or perhaps the fact that we mentioned Zikaron, that Rosh Hashanah is Zikaron, also Rosh Chodesh is Zikaron, and therefore the mention of Zikaron will then include Rosh Chodesh. Or Marlon, Rav Hun responded to us, Tanisua. It mentions in our Mishnah, Rabbi Doisa Omer Ha'over Lifnei HaTeva V'chulei. Rabbi Doisa mentions in our Mishnah that you do have to mention Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah, and the Chachamim are choilek, whereby therefore we see that indeed the halacha would be that you do not have to mention Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah. So that's the answer to your question. Says the students back to the Rabbi Rav Huna, my love lahaskir. This is still Rav Huna's explanation of the Mishnah. Isn't our Mishnah talking about lahaskir, mentioning Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah, and therefore, since the Chachamim are choilek, you would not have to mention Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah? Loi. The Talmidim said back, lahasna, our Mishnah says the Chachamim are choilek on Rav Doisa is in regards to making a T'nai. But in regards to the aspect that Rav Doisa mentioned, they have to mention Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah, that they agreed with. And now the Talmidim want to prove what they said from a Braisa, that indeed the Chacham are not choilek on Rabbi Doisa that you have to mention Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah. You do have to mention it. Midiktani beBraisa. It says in the Braisa as follows: V'chein haya Rabbi Doisa oiseh b'roshei chadoshim shel kol hashana kula v'lo hoidu loy. That Rabbi Doisa said that he made all of Roshei Chadoshim throughout the year, and the Chacham were choilek. Now, what are we talking about here? Says the Gemara to analyze. If you want to say that they're arguing about regards to making a t'nai, a stipulation, then it would make sense that the Chacham are arguing on Rabbi Doisa that you should not have to make a t'nai all year long when it comes to Rosh Chodesh throughout the year. But if you want to say that they're arguing in regards to making a mentioning of Rosh Chodesh throughout the year, why should the Chacham argue on that? So now Rav Huna responds to the Talmidim, and you want to say Talmidim that therefore the same way that the Chachamim are in agreement with Rabbi Doisa in regards to mentioning Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah, but they're only arguing in regards to making it T'nai, well then the same argument is both in the Mishnah and the Braisa. They argue on Rabbi Doisa that you don't have to make it T'nai. So ask the Gemara, if you're saying that they're arguing in regards to T'nai here in the Braisa, well then they're also arguing the same point in the Mishnah. Why do they have to argue the same point in two places, in the Mishnah and the Braisa? It's superfluous. Says the Gemara Tzricha, we do need to mention the machlokes between Rabbi Doisa and the Chachamim in regards to T'nai, both in the Mishnah and in the Braisa. The Iyashmin Rosh Hashanah Hava Mina Behoka Amri Rabbanan Deloy Mishum Deloy Mishum Deosi Lezuzi Bey. The reason why we have to mention Rosh Hashanah in regards to the machlokes in our Mishnah is because if we don't mention it in the Mishnah, we might think that the Rabbanan do not want to mention T'nai, they say you don't have to mention Tanai because they don't. If you mention Tanai, then they'll say that one of the days is not Kodesh, the other day is Chol, and therefore people mezalzel in Rosh Hashanah by thinking that you don't have to then observe both days. But the Rosh Chodesh of all year long, there the Rabbanan would agree with Rabbi Doisa that you can make a stipulation. There's no concern because there's no malacha involved, and therefore they would agree. You can go ahead and make it tonight. And if you mention this, meaning in the Braisa, in regards to the Rosh Chodesh, that all year long, that there, Rabbi Doisa says that you make a stipulation, you make a t'nai. But in our Mishnah, in regards to Rosh Hashanah, then Rabbi Doisa would agree with the Rabbanan not to make a stipulation, as not to have a zilzul. Tzricha, and therefore we have to mention them both, because in both cases, Rabbi Doisa maintains his shita that you do have to make a stipulation, both on Rosh Hashanah as well as throughout the year. And in both cases, the Chachamim argue and say do not make a stipulation both on Rosh Hashanah and throughout the year. Ask the Gemara from the following Braisa, that which you say you have to mention Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah, Meisfei, Rosh Hashanah Shechaliyos b'Shabbos, when Rosh Hashanah comes out to be on Shabbos, Beis Shammai Omrim Mispalel Eser, Ubeis Hillel Omrim Mispalel Teisha. When it comes to Rosh Hashanah, the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, there are 9 brachos. And Beis Shammai says, since it's Chal on Shabbos, you have to then make an additional bracha for Shabbos. Therefore, you have 10 brachos. Beis Hillel says, no, you can include Shabbos in the bracha of Rosh Hashanah, and therefore you only have the 9 brachos. V'imisa asked the Gemara now from this Braisa, if it's indeed true that you have to mention Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah, then the shita of Beis Shammai is such that for every additional mi'ara, every additional event, you have to mention an additional bracha. So Beis Shammai achas esrei miboile. Beis Shammai should require 11 brachos. When it comes out to be Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos, you have the 9 brachos of Rosh Hashanah's Shmona Esrei, an additional bracha for the Shabbos, and an additional bracha of Rosh Chodesh. So why does Beis Shammai say there's only 10? Answers the Gemara on top of Mem Amud Beis, Omar Rabbi Zera Shaini Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is different. In regards to Rosh Chodesh, we do not make an additional bracha in the Shmona Esrei. Even Beis Shammai would agree with that. Why? Since when it comes to Shacharis and Mincha and Mariv, there we also combine the bracha of Rosh Chodesh into the other brachos. We don't make a separate bracha. So too, therefore, we don't go ahead and make a separate bracha for Musaf. And therefore, although it's true one has to be mazkir Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah, but it's not a stira that Beis Shammai says that you don't make an additional bracha, because we don't make an additional bracha for Rosh Chodesh, not on Shabbos and not Rosh Hashanah. Ask the Gemara, Umi islehu leBeis Shammai koilel. The Gemara says, does Beis Shammai indeed hold this, that the bracha is combined and you don't need to make a separate bracha? V'hatanya, Rosh Chodesh shechal liyos b'Shabbos, when Rosh Chodesh does fall out to be on Shabbos, mispalel sheva. Beis Shammai, mispalel shmoina, Beis Hillel mispalel sheva. Beis Shammai is the opinion that in addition to 7 brachos that you make on the Shmona Esrei of Shabbos, you add an additional bracha for Rosh Chodesh, 8 brachos. So we see that Beis Shammai does say that you add another bracha for the Shmona Esrei when it comes to Rosh Chodesh. Even though Beis Hillel maintains only 7 because you combine it, but Beis Shammai does say that you need to make an additional bracha. It's not koilel. Gemara says kasha. Indeed, this is a difficulty. One has to explain why this is so when it comes to Shabbos and why this will not be so according to Beis Shammai when it comes to Rosh Hashanah.